Greetings fellow members of the Esoteric Order of Gamers, and welcome to a brand new series of video tutorials. And what is the EOG covering this time, I hear you ask? Well, it's Warhammer, Age of Sigmar, Soul Wars. The Esoteric Order of Gamers doesn't often cover Games Workshop mainstream games. And when I say mainstream, of course, I mean Age of Sigmar and Warhammer 40,000. There's a lot of stuff available on the net about them, and I don't actually play them very often. I prefer more esoteric games. But I couldn't resist grabbing this new starter set. The Night Haunt faction is really nicely designed and attracted me to this set. So I decided to grab it, and then I decided to film the entire process of building and painting all the miniatures. So in this series, I'm going to be going through that long process, and I think it'll be quite interesting because I'm also going to time the amount of time that it takes. So you've all got a good idea of how long it takes to put together a set like this. And after that, I'm going to film at least one battle report with the painted miniatures with another gamer who is not so experienced with tabletop miniatures games as I am. So it'll be very interesting to see his take on this mainstream tabletop miniatures game. So let's get started on this brand new series. I hope you enjoy it. And of course, let me know what you think and put any comments either in the comments of YouTube below or on my social media channels. I look forward to hearing from you, and I really hope you enjoy this series. Okay, Warhammer Age of Sigmar, Soul Wars, here we go. Okay, let's get started with one of the ghost figures, because to me they're a little bit more fun. The Knight of Shrouds on Ethereal Steed. This comes on sprue F. This is the sprue concerned. I'm just going to go through this step by step. So the first thing you do is get parts F1 and F2. So let's get them off the sprue. You have to find them. There's F2. Just using the clippers, clip them from the sprue as close to the model as you can, but be very careful that you don't actually chop anything off that belongs to the piece. F2, F1 is this large bit here. There's our two bits. Now the next thing I do is give them a little bit of a clean. You want to clean off those little lugs where they were attached to the sprue, and also there might be slight mould lines along there. Now to clean off the bits of lugs, a scalpel, just carefully shaving off that excess plastic, like that. And then to get rid of these mould lines, you can either use the scalpel, just the edge of it like this, just scrape it off, or you can use the custom Games Workshop tool, which is this thing here, and that basically does almost exactly the same thing, but it works quite well. And then you can clean that up like so. You don't have to worry about the bits on the bottom of the base because they're going to be hidden. There's another little lug there. Sometimes you can use the tool directly to clean this off, but usually it's easier just to use a scalpel. Sometimes the pieces are really tiny and this is difficult to do, so you can stick them together and then do this afterwards. Now, of course, you can go to as much trouble as you want to here. You can be very, very careful and make sure you get absolutely everything. Or if you want to do a relatively quick job like me, just get rid of the more obvious bits. Do the same on this bit. Of course, as always, when using sharp knives, be very careful with your fingers. Right, so we want to stick these two bits together. Now before you use any glue, just do a little test fit. so you know exactly how they go together. And in fact, these pieces fit together so well you don't even need to use glue, but of course I think it's better to use glue and make sure that they're permanently fixed. And then you can see, okay, which bits actually glue together. Get a rough idea. And then get your glue. I use this one with this little thin applicator because you can get a lot of detail out of it. Now try not to use too much glue because you don't want it squirting out between the joins. And also when you're placing the glue, place it towards the inside of the join rather than the outside. So when it does squeeze together a bit, it will squeeze into the model instead of on the outside. That also goes into that lug there. Join them together and then just hold it tightly together for a few seconds so the glue takes hold. And there we go, that's our first piece. We just have to work our way through the rest of these instructions. So we've got that bit. The next bit is F3. Let's chop that off. That's this bit here, I believe. Now, as you get more used to this, you could probably chop off a few pieces ahead of time and clean them ahead of time, put it together, but sometimes when models get a little bit more complicated, you can lose track of what pieces are which, so you have to be careful you don't do that. There it is, our Knight of Shrouds on Ethereal Steed, and it's a stunning figure. Really has a lot of movement, real ethereal quality with all these ragged bits coming off it. It looks great. So I'm just going to continue through this book, putting all my pieces together. Some of them, of course, are very simple. These little chain rasps are just two pieces for the most part, very easy to put together. Some of them are more complicated, like this one, but the diagrams are very clear, so just keep following the book bit by bit, cleaning the pieces as you go, and you'll have no troubles. And that's the end of step one. That took me exactly 6 hours. It's quite a long time, but I'm doing this over a rainy weekend. I've got some enjoyable podcasts on my iPad which I'm listening to as I put them together. So it's quite a leisurely 6 hours putting all those together. Now these figures are very, very finely detailed and also very fragile in places. You can see there's some very fragile bits. Some of these arms coming up on the wraiths there are very, very thin. So be careful. I don't know really how anyone would store these figures in foam. Of course, I'm going to magnetize the bases so I can store them upright on sheets of steel. But if you put these in foam, really, you'd rip them to shreds, taking them in and out of foam because there are so many fragile little parts to them. Having a look at these figures, you might notice there are some bits where you've got some little gaps where the pieces should have joined together nice and cleanly. And that may be because those press fit lugs made it a little bit stiff and you couldn't get it together, or it just came apart when you weren't pressing it long enough together. All this can happen. You can end up with these little gaps. So you want to fill those gaps before we finally undercoat these figures. And for that, I've discovered this fantastic stuff called plastic putty. It's by Vallejo, and it works really well because it's got this very fine applicator. And all you have to do is squirt a little bit into the gap, like so, and then you can use a brush and just wipe away the excess, and you'll see that a little bit of it stays in the gap. You can also wet that brush just a teeny bit for cleanup. get rid of the excess. And you can see how it fills that gap rather nicely. Now this stuff, when it dries, goes hard, and you can file it down if you wish, if you want to smooth it down even more. So any place I've got little gaps, I use this stuff. That's Vallejo plastic putty, and I'm really glad I've discovered that because it makes filling those gaps a lot easier. There are other ways of closing up joins. You can use a needle file like this and just file over the area if you can access it easily, and that can close up any join. Or you can use your tools in the same way you would as if you were cleaning a mould line, just to smooth over where the two parts join up. But it really depends how much effort you want to put into this step and how perfect you want your figures to be. Personally, I just want to do them pretty quickly and get them on the table pretty quickly, so I'm not going to go to too much trouble with these. I'm just going to fill any more obvious gaps. So I've only spent just under half an hour on cleaning up those bits, and now I'm going to get on to step 3, which is doing the bases. Now, of course, there are lots and lots of ways to do your bases, but I have a very simple technique, and you can see it in detail on my separate video on how to base your miniatures. You could use paint on texture, which is supplied by Games Workshop. You could use sand, but I use ground up clay kitty litter. So I get some clay kitty litter, I put her in a mortar and pestle, and I grind it all up, and I get this nice varied amount of granularity, everything from fine dust all up to little rocks, and I can shake it about so I can get all the fine stuff on one side and the harder rocks, the larger rocks on the other side. And then I get my miniature and I get an old brush, and I've got some white glue, just paint it onto the base. Like so. Then I just shake this so I've got the finer stuff on one side, and dip it in and shake it over the base. And then I just give it a blow to get the excess off and clean up around the edge. And there you go. I'm going to do that with all the other miniatures, and then I'm going to let it dry, and after that I'll do a watered down mix of PVA glue and just put a watered down mix over the top to seal that a little bit better, and then all my bases will be done. So it's a bit of a tedious step, but you've just got to do it all in one go and get it over and done with, and you get this nice textured base on all of your miniatures. So let's get started. And that's the next step complete. That took an hour and 12 minutes, and that was covering all the bases with my ground clay kitty litter combination, and then letting them dry for a while, and then putting a much more liquid layer of white PVA glue on it. So I'll just let that dry really, really thoroughly. The next step after this is going to be something that I could do later, but I'll just do now in the preparation phase, and it'll bring my first weekend of dealing with the Soul Wars set to a close, and that'll be putting magnets on them. These are my little magnets, and I'll be super gluing those to the underside of the bases, so later on I can easily store them on my steel sheets in my storage system, which I've shown in other videos. And that'll be the end of this first weekend. Hopefully I'll get a few evenings in this week to do some more work, but the next thing I'll be doing after this is priming them all and getting ready for the painting steps. So it's interesting to keep track of the time and realise that that whole preparation stage, even if I add in doing the magnets, is about 8 hours. So 8 hours work to get them all prepared, ready for priming. Now it's time for the undercoating phase, and for this I've created this ingenious contraption, which is a piece of balsa wood, a long piece of balsa wood, and a long piece of stainless steel. I've hot glued that to the balsa wood and then hot glued on some pieces of foam as a handhold. And you can see, because my figures are magnetized, they just plonk on there and they're nice and safe. They're not going to shake off. I don't have to muck around with blue tack. And then when I do my spraying outside, of course, this will be easy to hold. Now, to protect my hand, because it's going to cop a bit of the overspray, I've got some latex gloves, so I can put that on my hand so I protect it from the spray. For the undercoating, I'm using Games Workshop's Corax White, It's quite expensive here, NZ $30 a bottle, but it's the best undercoat I've come across. It's very fine, it goes on smooth, and I do want a nice smooth white coating for all these figures, especially the ghosts. Of course, I've got my gas mask and safety goggles, so I'll be protecting my lungs and eyes. Take it outside where there's lots of ventilation and spray these figures in batches. And then, finally, it'll be time to start the painting. We'll get into that next time.